Hi everyone, I am Dr.V.VIJI, Associate Professor of Economics, A.D.M.COLLEGE, NAGAPATTINAM. Today I have to explain the Keynesian theory. Here the Keynesian theory is included two parts. One is the principles of effective demand and the underemployment equilibrium theory. Here we have to see the introductory part. The logical starting point of Keynes' theory of employment is the principle of effective demand. In a capitalist economy, the level of employment depends upon effective demand. Thus, unemployment results from a deficiency of effective demand, and the level of employment can be increasing the level of effective demand. In ordinary parlance, demand means desire. It becomes effective when income is spent in buying consumption goods and investment goods. Keynes used the term effective demand to denote the total demand for goods and services at various levels of employment. The value of aggregate demand at the point of aggregate demand functions, where it is intersected by the aggregate supply functions, will be called the effective demand. Thus, according to Keynes, the level of employment is determined by effective demand, which in turn is determined by aggregate demand price and aggregate supply price. Now we have to see the aggregate demand price. The aggregate demand price for the output of any given amount of employment is the total sum of money of proceeds which is expected from the sale of the output produced when that amount of labor is employed. A statement showing the various aggregate demand prices at different levels of employment is called the aggregate demand price schedule or aggregate demand function. The table reveals that with the increase in the level of employment proceeds, expected rise and at lower levels of employment decline. The aggregate demand curve can be drawn on the basis of the above schedule. Here we have to see the aggregate demand schedule. This is two parts. One is level of employment and another one is aggregate demand price. The level of employment is increased from 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45 up to 50. And the aggregate demand price, that is the demand, it is increased in the form of crores, 230, 240, 250, 260, 270, 280 up to 290. Now we move on to aggregate supply price. When an entrepreneur gives employment to certain amount of labor, it requires certain quantities of current factors like land, capital, raw materials, etc., which will be paid remuneration along with labor. Thus, each level of employment involves certain money costs of production, including normal profits which the entrepreneur must cover. A statement showing the various aggregate supply prices at different levels of employment is called the aggregate supply price schedule or aggregate supply function. In the word of Professor Dillard, the aggregate supply function is a schedule of the minimum amounts of proceeds required to induce varying quantities of employment. Here we have to see the aggregate demand supply curve. It includes two parts. One is the level of employment, another one is aggregate supply price. The level of employment in lakhs, that is, it is increased from 20, 25 lakhs, 30, 35 lakhs, 40, 40 up to 40. Here the aggregate supply also increased from 215 crores, 230 crores, 245, 260, 275, 290 up to 295. Then the determinants of effective demand. We have studied the two determinants of effective demand separately and now are in a position to analyze the process of determining the level of employment is determined at the point where the aggregate demand price equals the aggregate supply price. In other words, it is the point where what entrepreneurs expect to receive equals what they must receive and their profits are maximized. The point of effective demand is, however, not necessarily one of full employment but of underemployment equilibrium. The following table explains the determinants of the point of effective demand. Here we have to see the combined table of aggregate demand and aggregate supply price. Here we have to see the level of employment in lakhs 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 40 up to 40. The aggregate supply, that is in the form of crores, 215, 219, 245, 260, 275 up to 305. The aggregate demand D and supply is compared to old and new. 230 to 290, the new demand price is 235, 245, 255, 265, 275, 285 up to 295. Here we have to see the diagrammatical explanation of this aggregate principles. Illustrate the determinants of effective demand where AD is the aggregate demand function and AS is the aggregate supply function. The horizontal axis measures the level of employment in the economy and the vertical axis the proceeds expected, the revenue and the proceeds necessary cost. The two curves AD and AS intersect each other at point E. This is effective demand where ON workers are employed at this point. The entrepreneur's expectations of profits are maximized. At any point other than this, the entrepreneurs will either incur losses or earn subnormal profits. Of the two determinants of effective demand, Keynes records the aggregate supply functions to be given because it depends on the technical condition of production, the availability of raw materials, machines, etc., which do not change in the short run. It is therefore the aggregate demand function which plays a vital role in determining the level of employment in the economy. According to Keynes, the aggregate demand function depends on the consumption function and investment function. If the aggregate demand function is raised beyond this point, the economy will experience inflation because all the existing resources are fully employed and their supply cannot be increased during the short run, as is apparent from the vertical portion of the AS curve in the figure 2. Then let us see the importance of effective demand. The principle of effective demand is the most important contribution of Keynes. It is the soul of the Keynesian theory of employment. Dr. Kelvin attributes the Keynesian revolution solely to the development of the theory of effective demand. Determinant employment. Effective demand determines the level of employment in the economy. When effective demand increases, employment also increases, and a decline in effective demand decreases the level of employment. Thus, unemployment is caused by a deficiency of effective demand. Effective demand represents the total expenditure on the total output produced at an equilibrium level of employment. It indicates the value of total output which equals national income. National income equals national expenditure. National expenditure consists of expenditure on consumption goods and investment goods. We may include that the importance of the principle of effective demand lies in pointing out the causes and remedy of unemployment. Reputation of Say's law and full employment. The principle of effective demand repudiates Say's law of markets, that supply creates its own demand and that full employment equilibrium is a normal situation in the economy. This principle points out that underemployment equilibrium is a normal situation and full employment equilibrium is an accidental situation. In a capitalist economy, supply fails to create its own demand because the whole of the earned income is not spent on the consumption of goods and services. Moreover, the decision of save and invest are made by different people. As a result, the existence of full employment is not a possibility, and the point out effective demand at any time represents underemployment equilibrium. Thus, the importance of this principle lies in reputation Say's law and the classical thesis of full employment equilibrium. Role of investment. The principle of effective demand highlights the significant role of investment in determining the level of employment in the economy. The two determinants of effective demand are consumption and investment expenditure. When income increases, consumption expenditure also increases, but by less than the increase in income. Thus, there arises a gap between income and consumption, which leads to decline in the volume of employment. This Gap can be bridged by an increase in either consumption expenditure or investment expenditure in order to achieve full employment level of effective demand in the economy. Since the propensity to consume is stable during the short run, it is not possible to raise the consumption expenditure. Therefore, the level of effective demand and hence of employment can be raised by an increase in investment. In this lies the importance of investment. The paradox of poverty in the midst of potentiality. The importance of effective demand lies in explaining the paradox of poverty in the midst of potential plenty in modern capitalism. Effective demand is mainly determined by the aggregate demand function, which is composed of consumption expenditure and investment expenditure. A fundamental principle is that when income increases, consumption also increases by less than opportunity. That is, the marginal propensity to consume is less than 1. This creates a gap between income and consumption, which must be filled up by the required investment expenditure. If the appropriate investment is not forthcoming to fill this gap, it leads to a deficiency of effective demand resulting in unemployment. But in a richer community, investment depends is not adequate to fill this gap, and there emerges a deficiency of aggregate demand resulting in widespread unemployment. The Keynesian theory of income output and employment. The Keynesian theory of income output and employment. In the Keynesian theory, employment depends upon the effective demand. Effective demand results in output creates income, income provides employment. Since Keynes assumes all these four quantities, effective demand, output, income, and employment equal to each other, he regards specimen as a function of income. Effective demand is determined by two factors, the aggregate supply function and the aggregate demand function. Aggregate supply function depends on physical or technical conditions of production which do change in the short run. Since Keynes assumes the aggregate supply function to be stable, he concentrates his entire attention upon the aggregate demand function to fight depression and unemployment. Thus, employment depends on aggregate demand, which in turn is determined by consumption demand and investment. According to Keynes, employment can be increased by increasing consumption, or investment consumption depends on income, that is C within bracket Y. C is the function of income. And when income rises, consumption also rises, but not as much so. In other words, as income rises, saving rises. Consumption can be increased by rising the propensity consume in order to increase income and employment. The relation be the figure where the total demand for money is measured along precautionary. Demand is given by the horizontal axis from the curve OF and OT. At OT income level, the transaction demand is given by the L curve, that is represents Lorentz curve, represents the speculative demand for the interest is forward level of income OM, and all for money as the speculative demand for money is R, with the speculative depends for money increases to Mr. Fiesel shows the rate of interest falls to R. The investment increases of the rate of interest where the call in the case of the Keynesian analysis, the equilibrium level, employment and income is determined at the point of equality between saving and investment. Saving is a function of income. It is defined as excess of income over consumption, S, Y, and C. And income is equal to consumption plus investment, thus X minus C and investment. So the equilibrium level of income is established where savings equals investment. This is shown in figure D or panel D of figure 1, where the horizontal axis from O towards the right represents investment and saving, and the OF axis represents income high is the savings curve. Here we have to take the explanation of Keynesian underemployment equilibrium. Here we have to take 4 different levels of diagrams. It is extended from A to D. Here the figure A is represents income and quantity of money, and B is extended from A, that is interest rate and quantity of money. Then figure C is extended from B, it measures the marginal efficiency of capital. Then the diagram D is extended from C, it includes investment and saving rate, also income. Next. Same and equal amount of investment at all levels of the 45-degree line, aggregate supply curve. The equilibrium at point where the aggregate curve intersects the 45-degree line. This is the point of the demand where the equilibrium level of income and is determined. This equilibrium of investment is the level of under and not of full employment. Employment income can make the two curves their full employment level. If it happens, the employment level, it will be accidental. Keynes records full employment equilibrium level as a normal case. The full employment income level as a special case, suppose OY is the full employment income level. To reach this level, autonomous investment is increased by TO, hard C plus I, curve shift upward as C plus plus curve by the equilibrium level. The higher point of effective demand corresponding the full employment income level OF. This also reveals that to get a desired in employment and income Y, it is the multiplier effect of an increase in investment, which leads to the diagrammatical explanation. Here we have to take the consideration of employment and income in the x-axis, consumption, investment, saving is considered in the y-axis. Here we have to see the 3 levels of consumption, C, C plus I plus delta I. Here the investment is increased from one level to another level. Here we have to take the consideration of 45-degree line, income that is equal to C plus S. Here we have to see the two equilibriums from E to E1. When the increment in investment it gives another equilibrium, that is E1. Here the income is increased from Y1 to Y2. This is the explanation given by Professor Keynes. Now we have to come under the conclusion part. Keynes' ideas significantly impacted economic thought and policy making, especially during the Great Depression of the 1930s. His advocacy for active government intervention to manage the economy and to promote full employment laid the foundation for what became known as Keynesian economics. Here we have seen principle of effective demand and Keynesian underemployment. Thank you.